The big three RV manufacturers said nothing was wrong. The government just proved otherwise. Federal teams reviewing factory data found alerts that were never disclosed, inspection gaps that shouldn't exist, and approval signatures that fast-tracked units with known issues. The deeper they dig, the clearer it becomes. This could reshape how these brands are viewed for years. Who knew what and when? How many rigs on the road were built under these conditions? And what does this mean for everyone who bought one in good faith? The federal trigger event. The first signal came when regulators noticed an unusual cluster of complaints referencing the same failures across Winnebago, Thor, and Forest River units. These were different models, sold in different months, yet the defect descriptions lined up too neatly to ignore. Investigators reviewed submissions from owners who reported electrical faults appearing within the first weeks of ownership. Others described early structural fatigue or components loosening without heavy use. The consistency across unrelated models suggested a deeper structural issue within the production ecosystem. Complaint spikes happen in any manufacturing sector, but this spike had a pattern. Identical failures emerging across three major manufacturers within the same time frame pointed toward a shared weakness, not isolated coincidence. Once analysts charted the complaint data across model years, the overlap became even harder to dismiss. Certain defects appeared repeatedly during specific production windows, revealing a rhythm that reflected internal processes more than random chance. This prompted regulators to elevate the matter from routine complaint review to a formal investigative track. The early signals were too aligned and the implications too broad to treat as everyday noise. With the complaint map established, investigators turned to the financial records to see whether pricing behavior showed the same kind of alignment. The coordinated price pattern. When regulators examined pricing sheets from several consecutive years, another pattern emerged. Winnebago, Thor, and Forest River raised sticker prices in nearly identical increments, even during periods when material costs stayed flat or declined. To verify the trend, analysts compared commodity pricing for aluminum, plywood, wiring, sealants, and fasteners. None of the data explained the parallel price increases. In some cases, the retail rise outpaced input costs by a factor of 2, creating unexplained gaps between what the units cost to build and what customers ultimately paid. Investigators then interviewed dealers who described receiving updated pricing sheets from the manufacturers around the same narrow windows each year. These synchronized adjustments influenced financing terms, trade-in valuations, and the final out-the-door price. The timing suggested more than seasonal strategy. It reflected a coordinated approach across companies that were supposed to be independent competitors. That raised concerns about whether buyers were paying inflated premiums without receiving proportional value or improved durability. As analysts aligned the financial findings with the defect data, a larger picture began to form. Something in the production and pricing ecosystem was moving in unison, and that movement kept pointing back to the factories. To understand whether the rising prices reflected better builds, investigators examined the production floor evidence next. If these findings concern you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe for continued updates, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps these investigations visible and helps others understand what is unfolding across the industry today. The manufacturing shortcut files. Production logs obtained through the inquiry exposed a clear pattern. Units were being pushed forward on the assembly line even after failing key checks. In several instances, alerts acknowledging out-of-spec components appeared in the logs without any matching corrective entries. Instead of pausing assembly to fix the issue, supervisors signed off on continued progress. These approvals frequently occurred during high-volume periods, reflecting the pressure to keep production moving rather than focus on long-term reliability. Internal communication showed that some suppliers flagged tolerance issues, yet the components were still accepted into builds. That meant units left the factory with structural or mechanical weaknesses already baked in, well before reaching dealer lots. Analysts also noted that certain shortcut patterns repeated during staffing shortages or near end-of-quarter deadlines. These were precisely the times when production pressure tends to override proper process controls. The result was predictable: early life failures that mirrored the issues found in customer complaints. The logs painted a picture of a workflow optimized for output speed, not durability. With production shortcuts now confirmed, investigators needed to know how those unresolved issues passed final inspection and entered the marketplace. That question led directly to the internal memos that documented how inspections were approved, the whistleblower memos. The investigation reached a turning point when internal notes surfaced detailing how inspection failures were cleared through signatures rather than repairs. Several memos referenced unresolved issues marked as addressed, even though no mechanical work had been performed. These were not clerical oversights. The notes showed that units with structural concerns, wiring inconsistencies, and ceiling gaps were moved to outbound staging, simply because deadlines were approaching. The memos highlighted a culture where timely shipment overshadowed long-term reliability. Some approvals came from departments not directly tied to quality control, suggesting broader operational pressure influenced the process. This explained why downstream teams, including dealers and repair centers, often discovered issues that should never have reached them. Investigators reviewing the memos noted phrasing that hinted at recurring patterns. References to maintaining flow and avoiding production stalls appeared multiple times across different months and model lines. By the time units reached final inspection, earlier details had been condensed or removed from summary records, masking the unresolved problems. These memos revealed a systemic approach that prioritized volume over verification. With this documentation in hand, investigators were now prepared to examine how widespread the approval pattern was across the entire production network. These findings set the stage for the broader industry analysis that followed. The archive regulators weren't supposed to see. The turning point came when investigators received internal diagnostic archives that did not match the information provided to customers. These files showed a very different picture of unit health. Several RVs flagged with critical electrical and structural alerts in internal systems appeared as fully compliant in consumer-facing documentation. The mismatch raised immediate concerns about how defects were classified and communicated. The archive included alert logs, stress readings, and early life failure markers that were never disclosed outside the factory. Some units showed elevated risk indicators before they were even delivered to dealers, yet the paperwork bundled with those units reflected normal operation. Analysts reviewing the files noted a clear split between internal diagnostics and public reporting, suggesting a pattern rather than a clerical error. The discovery forced regulators to confront the possibility that certain warning data was intentionally withheld. It also explained why so many early failures surprised both owners and service departments. The discrepancies were too consistent to ignore, forming the backbone of the expanding investigation. With this new evidence, regulators recognized that internal reporting practices required deeper review. Those reporting concerns pushed investigators to examine how warranty cases were handled once units reached dealer lots, the dealer pressure mechanics. When investigators interviewed dealers, a new layer of the system came into view. Service managers described informal instruction patterns that shaped how warranty complaints were handled. No written directive existed, but the expectations were clear: slow the escalation, redirect the concern, and limit the number of cases forwarded to the manufacturer. Several managers recalled moments when obvious defects were treated as routine maintenance issues, simply because pushing them upstream would invite scrutiny. The approach created a bottleneck where owners experienced long delays, repeated appointments, and unclear answers. It also allowed units with manufacturing flaws to stay on the road longer without formal acknowledgement. Dealers explained that pressing too hard on warranty cases risked damaging relationships with suppliers who controlled allocation and model availability. That relationship imbalance made it difficult for smaller dealers to challenge decisions that seemed unfair or incomplete. This dynamic also contributed to the widespread frustration felt by owners who struggled to obtain straightforward resolutions. The interviews revealed that frontline service teams operated under economic pressure rather than transparent quality protocols. These findings signaled a deeper systemic issue, linking factory reporting to dealer behavior. To verify the full picture, investigators next reviewed inspection video logs to understand how defects were documented at the source. The missing diagnostic footage. Inspection video logs were expected to provide clarity on how testing was performed before units left the factory. Instead, they presented a new problem. Audit teams found numerous empty timestamps where footage should have existed, creating unexplained gaps in the inspection record. These gaps aligned with moments when units later exhibited serious failures, raising concerns about whether the missing footage reflected incomplete testing or erased evidence. Digital logs normally include continuous recordings that verify each stage of the inspection process. However, the retrieved files showed abrupt breaks precisely during key structural checks and electrical evaluations. Analysts cross-referenced the missing intervals with internal diagnostic alerts and found that several units with incomplete footage were the same ones flagged for early life defects. The absence of data created inconsistencies between what the paper trail claimed and what the digital evidence showed. It became difficult to rely solely on documented checklists when the video needed to confirm them was missing. The missing footage intensified scrutiny over factory protocols and record retention practices. Investigators concluded that the inconsistencies required immediate escalation, as the gaps pointed to potential integrity issues in how inspections were carried out and recorded. With concerns growing, regulators prepared to broaden their authority and directly examine operational environments. The shift in federal tactics. Once the pattern of discrepancies became clear, regulators initiated a shift in approach. Instead of relying only on documentation provided by the manufacturers, they requested direct access to production facilities, repair centers, and internal communication systems. This expanded authority allowed investigators to observe how inspection processes operated in real time rather than through curated summaries. Teams began collecting server snapshots to analyze how diagnostic data was stored, modified, or transmitted across departments. They also conducted on-site evaluations of repair centers, comparing actual practices with the procedures described in company manuals. These steps provided a more accurate view of how units moved through the life cycle, from assembly to after-sale service. The broadened scope also included interviews with technicians who described inconsistencies between official guidance and daily workflow demands. Their testimonies clarified how operational pressure could influence decisions at multiple stages, from initial assembly to warranty handling. This tactical shift reflected the seriousness of the inquiry. Regulators now sought a comprehensive understanding of both documented policy and lived practice. Each new discovery tightened the investigative net, revealing a system that required deeper oversight than originally anticipated. With these expanded tactics in place, the investigation prepared to follow the evidence into its broader industry implications. The consolidation map. As investigators broadened their scope, they began mapping the corporate ownership behind the most recognizable RV labels. What initially looked like a diverse field of competing brands quickly revealed itself as a tightly connected network. More than 100 names on dealership lots traced back to the same 3 corporate groups, all operating through layered subsidiaries and acquired divisions. This consolidation allowed a small number of decision-makers to influence pricing, production standards, and distribution without appearing as a unified force. Analysts reviewing supply chain records noted shared vendors, identical component contracts, and synchronized production calendars. Even brands marketed as premium or independent often relied on the same underlying parts, creating uniform weaknesses across product lines. Consumers believed they were choosing between different manufacturers, but the supply network repeatedly pointed to the same consolidation diagram. This discovery helped explain why similar defects surfaced across brands that seemed unrelated on the surface. The production lines differed in name, but not in structural oversight. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer the pattern became. Choice existed in branding, not in the underlying build. With the consolidation map established, the inquiry turned toward understanding how this structure shaped customer behavior and long-term ownership outcomes. That next step led directly into the examination of how brand switching created the illusion of escaping persistent problems. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe so you do not miss the updates that follow. This investigation is evolving quickly, and staying subscribed ensures you see each new development as it emerges and begins shaping the market ahead today. The consumer choice illusion. Investigators reviewed purchase histories from owners who traded one troubled unit for another, under the belief they were upgrading to a more reliable brand. Many switched to avoid a repeat of their earlier mechanical issues, only to discover that the new unit was built under the same corporate umbrella as the one they traded in. The illusion of variety created confidence that the problem lay with a single model instead of the system behind it. These histories revealed a pattern. Owners believed they were making informed decisions based on branding, advertising, and dealer recommendations. However, the underlying manufacturing processes, component suppliers, and quality control methods remained nearly identical across supposedly distinct labels. The result was a costly cycle where customers attempted to outrun defects without realizing they were still within the same production framework. This misunderstanding also influenced long-term ownership costs. A buyer who replaced one failing unit with another often absorbed additional depreciation and financing losses, believing they had switched manufacturers. In reality, they had only switched names. With the brand illusion exposed, investigators shifted their focus to how maintenance centers handled ongoing issues that should have been resolved at the factory level. That shift brought the inquiry directly to the repair documentation that revealed a troubling pattern of recurring shortcuts: the repair center pattern. Repair documentation reviewed during the investigation showed that temporary fixes were more common than full repairs. Service records described cosmetic patches applied over structural defects, mismatched hardware used in place of proper components, and hastily applied sealant meant to buy time rather than solve the underlying problem. These stopgap measures appeared repeatedly across reports from different regions and different brands, pointing to systemic pressure rather than isolated judgment calls. Technicians described circumstances where parts were unavailable or back-ordered, forcing them to improvise solutions that would pass immediate inspection but not withstand normal use. These improvised fixes often resulted in owners returning within a matter of months with the same failures, now compounded by additional wear. The recurrence of these patterns explained why certain units cycled through repair centers multiple times without achieving meaningful improvement. The documentation showed that many repairs addressed symptoms rather than causes, leading to prolonged downtime and rising ownership costs. This evidence strengthened the case that the issues originated far earlier than the service bay. With the repair cycle documented, investigators turned toward understanding how repeated failures affected owners on both financial and personal levels. Those consequences became clear once the inquiry examined the real-world impact documented in owner case files. The ownership consequences. Case files submitted during the investigation revealed the downstream effects of unresolved defects. Families described losing deposits on trips planned months in advance because their RV spent entire seasons in service bays. Others shared records showing significant depreciation within the first year, driven not by mileage or damage, but by the reputation of the model line and the frequency of repeat repairs. Financial data showed loan balances that quickly outpaced market value, leaving owners with limited options when considering a trade or sale. Some files documented units that became unsafe to tow due to structural weakness, forcing owners to pay for storage or disposal while still carrying outstanding loan obligations. These burdens extended beyond finances, affecting travel plans, retirement budgets, and confidence in the products they once trusted. Owners described long delays for parts and service responses, adding financial strain and emotional frustration. Many felt trapped in an unresolved cycle. These accounts made clear that the investigation's earlier findings carried real personal and economic consequences far beyond mechanical defects alone. With the human and economic impact now documented, investigators prepared to move into the final phase to determine accountability and potential remedies. Legislative momentum. As investigation findings reached congressional staff and regulatory committees, policy teams began outlining new requirements aimed at tightening oversight of the RV industry. Early drafts focused on mandatory defect disclosure, standardized inspection reporting, and clearer warranty obligations. The proposals reflected a recognition that existing rules did not adequately protect consumers from undisclosed risks or recurring failures. Lawmakers reviewing the evidence noted how the gaps between internal documentation and public reporting created room for misrepresentation. That gap motivated suggestions for a centralized reporting system, where manufacturers would be required to submit all diagnostic findings, not just the ones selected for consumer documentation. Discussions also included expanding recall authority to ensure that structural or electrical issues identified during investigations could be addressed quickly across entire model lines. Industry representatives testified as committees highlighted weakened public trust and stressed transparency, accountability, and timely communication. Members warned that without intervention, the same patterns would persist. As additional details emerged, legislative momentum strengthened. creating a climate where policy changes shifted from theoretical discussions to necessary action. As the policy framework solidified, analysts turned to the specific penalties that might be applied to the companies involved. The penalties on the table. Legal analysts began drafting the range of consequences that could result from the investigation's findings. Early discussions centered on fines tied to undisclosed defects, with penalties scaled based on the severity, frequency, and duration of the unreported issues. Some proposals included financial restitution for owners whose units experienced repeat failures attributable to factory-level decisions. Regulators also considered forced buybacks for certain models, where structural defects or electrical risks appeared consistently across production windows. This option required careful review because buybacks could impose substantial financial obligations on the companies involved. Analysts reviewed records from past cases in other industries to determine appropriate benchmarks for compensation. Penalties for incomplete reporting became a central concern as investigators found paperwork omitting internal warnings, raising potential disclosure violations across multiple model years. Such omissions could trigger fines spanning several production cycles. Although outcomes remained undecided, the breadth of possible consequences underscored the investigation's seriousness and a demand for accountability. While penalties moved toward the negotiation stage, the market itself began responding in noticeable ways. The independent builder surge. As awareness of the investigation spread, sales trends began shifting towards smaller manufacturers known for slower production and higher durability. Buyers who experienced unresolved failures with larger brands started seeking alternatives produced by companies with more controlled build processes. These independent builders typically used fewer subcontracted components, reducing variability and improving long-term performance. Sales data from regional dealers showed measurable increases in demand for brands, emphasizing craftsmanship over volume. Some of these manufacturers reported wait lists forming for the first time in several years, driven by owners seeking a more predictable experience. The trend suggested a growing desire for units built with consistency rather than rapid output. Technicians noted that smaller builders provided clearer documentation, faster parts support, and simpler systems, which appealed to owners tired of complex designs and recurring failures. Though still a smaller share of production, their growth signaled shifting confidence and increased pressure on larger corporations to respond to the investigation's concerns. As the market reacted, investigators uncovered one final document that tied the entire inquiry together, the document that reshapes the case. The investigation reached its defining moment when a final internal report surfaced, linking multi-year complaints to strategic decisions made at executive levels. The document outlined production targets, cost-cutting measures, and approval processes that aligned closely with the defects identified throughout the inquiry. It referenced discussions about streamlining assembly steps and reducing inspection times in ways that matched the patterns discovered in earlier phases. Analysts reviewing the report recognized that these decisions were not isolated to specific departments. Instead, they reflected a coordinated approach that shaped how units were built, tested, and documented. The language suggested that leadership was aware of potential risks associated with accelerated production schedules, yet moved forward due to competitive pressures and market expectations. The report shifted the investigation from routine defect review to possible corporate misconduct, revealing executive decisions tied to recurring failures. With leadership now under scrutiny, regulators prepared to weigh the full breadth of evidence and determine appropriate actions, setting the stage for decisions that could reshape the entire RV industry. If this video opened your eyes, make sure you like the video so more RV owners see what's really happening. Drop a comment and tell me if you've experienced any of these issues. Your story could help someone else spot a problem early. And don't forget to subscribe because this investigation is far from over. New documents are dropping, and the next update might affect your own unit.